In humanity's ancient past, there was a time when belief in the supernatural weighed heavy upon the mind, when spirits, monsters, and strange beings lurked in every corner of the land. A time when our ancestors would take great caution before venturing out their doors at night or traveling through wild places. It was a fantastic world, full of wonder and peril, and humanity was at the mercy of forces beyond its control and understanding. As we entered into the scientific era, we labeled these beliefs as superstition, effectively casting out these specters from our minds. We threw off the yoke of fear and, guided by reason, began to understand the mechanisms of the universe, demystifying that which had been shrouded in mystery. We seemingly became masters of the world, with the ability to control nature, radically changing our self-perception as beings of unlimited potential and agency. For hundreds of years, most of us have left our folk beliefs in the dustbin of history, as they were deemed to have no place in our modern world. But despite this, they continue to call us back. Even today, people from all over the world and from all walks of life experience the same supernatural phenomena that haunted our ancestors. Perhaps we never proved their non-existence. We simply chose to ignore them, but they are here nonetheless.
There's no denying it. I'm dragging a bunch of fucking ghouls around with me.
Hello, and welcome to The Hidden Passage. For this episode, I have a series of paranormal stories. These are alleged true encounters sent to me personally. In each of these cases, I've had extensive follow-up conversations with the witness in order to confirm as best I can their authenticity and to get as much detail surrounding the events as possible. So these stories were retold exactly as they were described to me, for the most part in the witness's own words. The only changes I made were for grammatical purposes, narrative flow, and maybe adding in some of the details that I got from follow-up conversations. So after each one, I'm going to give some commentary to explore possibilities in a suspension of disbelief. And that's kind of the spirit of this show. It's not going to be about debunking anything. It's easy to sit there and say something isn't real, especially when you've never experienced something for yourself. The fact is that nobody can really know. So without further ado, let's begin. The first story takes place in Mexico. A woman experienced supernatural occurrences while working at a bakery. At the end of the workday, she would stow away the cleaning supplies in the utility closet. When she came to work in the mornings, she would often find these supplies in places other than where she had left them. As she was the last person to leave the building and the first one in, she was puzzled as to how these items were being mysteriously moved around. In speaking to others about the strange occurrences, she was told that the likely culprit was a duende. When she was younger, she had had her own experiences with these beings, and so she was not afraid and kept going about her business as usual. She worked at the bakery for 2 years, largely ignoring the phantom misplacer. On the second to last day on the job, her broom went missing completely. On the last day, as she locked up, she loudly exclaimed to the empty shop, "Don't worry, you can keep the broom. I don't need it anymore." To her surprise, she heard a voice respond,
"Here's the broom."
Suddenly, a small gnome-like creature began running towards her with the broom in its hand. Startled, she quickly closed and locked the door before the entity could reach her, and left without looking back. So this is a classic fairy encounter. It has the hallmarks of pranking, stealing of items, and just typical hijinks that kind of highlights the mischievous personality of these creatures. I mean, what is this thing doing with a broom? Is it just doing it just to mess with people, or does it actually have like a use for it? So one of the takeaways for this to me was the idea that these little things that happen on a daily basis that we don't really think twice about could be in fact paranormal. And you kind of have two types of people. One is the person that, sees everything as like a sign. They see Jesus in a piece of toast. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who either they wouldn't even consider the possibility, or they just write everything off. Even if something is strange to them, they write it off as, it must have a rational explanation. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. When I was 16, I had a friend who went by the name of Tractor Jeff. He was kind of a crazy guy. He told me that he had seen a demon when he was a kid. He was very adamant about this, and I could tell that he was telling the truth. This is what first spurred my interest in the paranormal. I started digging because I knew there was something more to the world than meets the eye. I asked God if I could see the unseen. I truly wish I hadn't. 8 years later, my prayer was finally answered. These events began during an uncertain period in my life. At the time, I was doing some soul searching, not really sure of what I believed in spiritually, and trying to find the answers. I started getting into some new age spiritual ideas. I was kind of all over the place, looking into different beliefs and wondering how I could be sure which one, if any, was the truth. Eventually, I started getting into scientific concepts and believing that things I had previously considered to be evidence of a spiritual reality were mere coincidence. Even though I had believed in God my whole life, I decided that He didn't exist. It was during this time that I began to see them. Shadow people. Dark black human-like figures. They would appear on the walls, and it felt like they were watching me persistently, almost like it was their job. I couldn't understand why they were doing this. They appeared more at times when I felt like I was living the wrong way, or going against my true nature. One time, when I was really angry and packing a bag to go to my mom's, one of the shadow people materialized. It ran from my kitchen through the hallway really fast. That's the only time I've ever seen one that was not on the wall. These experiences really started to mess with my emotions. It got progressively worse to the point where I was seeing them every day. It scared me at first, but by then, I was almost used to seeing them and just accepted it. Still, I couldn't get used to the idea that I was never truly alone. When I told members of my family, they started to question my sanity. That's until they started seeing them too, and it was then that I reached my breaking point. One day, my son ran out of the bathroom with his pants still around his ankles. He was crying hysterically, saying that he had seen the shadow man pointing his finger at him. He would never go in that bathroom alone again. I hadn't told him about what I had seen until that incident. Altogether, this devastated my life. I laid in bed crying, praying to God that I wouldn't have to see them anymore. I said, if there are dark ones, then there have to be light ones too. Why do I never see those? Well, it turns out somebody was listening, because the next day I saw something that would change my life forever. As I was lying in bed, a huge bright white light appeared on the wall, fading in and out like glimmering sparkles, followed by a tiny human-shaped silhouette of pure light. It was about as tall as my index finger and had no recognizable face or features. It ran across the wall and hid behind my mirror as if it was scared. I just sat on my bed and watched. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Adrenaline was rushing through me like I had never experienced before. I could not believe my eyes. Then, another one came that looked the same but slightly larger. It was much braver than the first one. It proceeded to walk back and forth across the wall. At one point, it bent over like it was picking something up. At another, it started walking upside down. Later on, this made me wonder if it was not in its true form and just pretending to appear human-like. Soon, more began to appear and joined the first. A few of them were different colors. There was even a tinier one that was light red, another black. The whole time, there was this stationary blue line of light on my ceiling and a faint number 7 on the wall. After watching them for quite a long time, I thought about my son, who was downstairs. I asked them if they would let my son see them, and then went to get him. When we entered the room, they were gone. We sat down on the bed and waited a minute. Suddenly, the orange one with horse feet reappeared and stayed for a few minutes. I told my son that he would probably never see something like this again. I thanked the being, and then it left. Then the blue streak and the 7 faded away. We were left in total shock. We haven't seen anything since, neither light nor shadow. Years later, I am still blown away by this experience. It expanded my mind religiously, and my faith is now stronger than ever. I wasn't brought up to be religious. I was taught nothing about it growing up. It was my experiences that have made me this way. When you know these things are constantly there watching you, and possibly taking note of your good and bad deeds, it changes your entire perspective on the way you should act on a daily basis. I feel like I saw things that I was not supposed to see, and because of it, I feel cursed and blessed at the same time. So this story is an example of why context is key. Oftentimes, somebody's emotional state plays a huge factor into paranormal events. There is very much a human element to these things that is sometimes overlooked. Some even make the argument that paranormal phenomena is a psychic manifestation of the subconscious mind. In Tibetan beliefs, you have the idea of the tulpa, which is a being that is literally conjured from the mind. But even if this is true to some extent, it doesn't mean that these things aren't real. I think both can be true at the same time. Sometimes this can explain the paranormal, but I think it doesn't even come close to explaining everything. A lot of these things are just too random and visceral to be simply mental projections. The walls in this woman's house somehow became a window into another reality. It's like taking this mundane thing and making it mystical. This whole thing kind of reads as like a fairy tale, the original fairy tale, in that it's like a cautionary thing and it has these archetypal undercurrents going on. First of all, you have this mysterious character, Tractor Jeff. He sort of initiates this whole thing, sparks her interest into the paranormal. And it makes me think of, you have the old stories of these women who run into the devil, basically, and he offers them power or knowledge. The other thing this makes me think of is the story of the Garden of Eden, where Eve takes a bite of the apple, and the apple is described as the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. I think there's certain things that we just aren't supposed to know as human beings. The idea is that there is all this stuff going on around us that we normally can't perceive unless somebody has developed a second sight. This is often referred to as the third eye. But there's a reason why we're normally not able to access this. Because if we saw spirits floating around us all the time, we would probably go insane. In the New Age movement, there's kind of this preconception that enlightenment is just all, sugar and rainbows. But really, it can be a very harrowing experience. So during an enlightenment process, or any exploration of other realms, not only do we confront the innermost parts of ourselves, which can dissolve the ego and totally change our personality, but we also enter into a world that we are strangers to. It's occupied by forces beyond human comprehension, and we have a very limited ability to navigate this world. So for people who aren't initiated and aren't ready for it, they can kind of get in over their heads. I have a friend and mentor who practices shamanism, which is essentially a divination ritual whereby the shaman travels into the spirit world to gain some sort of knowledge. During these spirit journeys, there's an emphasis on having a guide, either the practitioner himself and/or spirit guides, and with a sense that it's important to return after a short time and ground yourself and to bring yourself back into the world. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the symbolism. I like this idea of the non-physical reality communicating through symbols. Manly P. Hall said that the universe itself, moving into manifestation, moves by projecting its own powers through forms, and these forms are symbols of these powers. Everything that exists in some way is an emblem standing for a principle itself invisible. So the first thing that jumped out to me was this number 7. I looked into the numerology, looking at it from a Christian perspective, which seemed appropriate because that's what this woman believed in. The number 7 relates to the 7 days of creation. And this woman, she's seeing all these shadow entities, and she's kind of having a crisis. She's wondering, is this all there is? Why am I only seeing the bad ones? Like, is there something wrong with me? And I think that this event at the end is a direct response to that, telling her that this is the other half of creation. You have the dark and the light. And these light entities are literally the opposite of the shadow ones. They're like shadows, but reverse shadows, and just these silhouettes of light. Then you have this blue line, which I guess could symbolize like the dividing line between opposite forces. So the other thing I thought was interesting is this pagan imagery going on with these beings that she's seeing on the wall. One of them has cloven feet, something you would see in Greek mythology, like the centaurs or the nymphs, something of that nature. There's some kind of blending here between Christian mythology and pagan mythology. I grew up in Ellicott City, Maryland. There's an area of woods that was associated with paranormal occurrences. When we were teenagers, my friends and I used to explore and hang out there, messing around with Ouija boards and things of that nature. My mother, who's Native American, did not approve, and she warned us to stay away. She believed that there were bad things that lurked in that forest. Now, I'm definitely a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural, and I'm no longer interested in doing the spooky stuff I did when I was younger. I've had hundreds of weird things happen in my life, but only a few that I consider to be truly unexplainable. I never took my mom's warning seriously, but years later, I found out that she was actually right. One night, my now ex-boyfriend and I were driving down a small windy back road on our way to Starbucks. It was about 8 p.m. in late fall, so it was pitch black out. A few cars were coming from the opposite direction as we passed by a thickly wooded area on our left and a field on our right. I was driving pretty slow, and we were just having a conversation, when all of a sudden, I saw the car on the opposite side of the road illuminate something in its headlights. In front of us were what looked like 2 8 to 9 foot tall dark brown legs with cloven feet, kind of like a deer, but they looked slightly transparent. They're walking out of the forest into the road. The headlights passed before I could see what, if anything, was attached to them. All I saw were these insanely huge legs. Their movement seemed unnatural. Whatever it was, almost looked like it was casually strolling, as in the legs looked like they were walking slowly, but the creature itself was moving across extremely fast. It didn't make any sense. I slammed on the brakes and watched this thing pass in front of my car. As soon as it went by, it disappeared. I was sure of this because the field it was heading towards had a few houses that cast light onto it, and I could see that there was nowhere for it to hide. I was so creeped out that my eyes were watering. I asked my boyfriend, "Did you see that?" And I finally broke my stare from the field to look at him. Tears were streaming down his face. He just nodded in silence. The car on the other side of the road creeped up next to us, and I could see the driver looking at me. It was a guy dressed in a full business suit, like he was coming home from work. He looked terrified. I rolled down the window, and he asked, "Did you guys see that too?" What the fuck was that thing? I mean, what the fuck? I told him, yeah, we did. And he replied, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. But I just don't know. His eyes trailed off, and he rolled up his window and drove away. My boyfriend was silent the rest of the drive, and the whole time I felt like it couldn't be over with soon enough. Back at the house, we talked about it for a few minutes, wondering what the hell it was, but to no end. To this day, my ex refuses to speak of it. I mentioned it to my mom, and she told me with certainty that what we had seen was a skinwalker. I told you to stop messing around with that place, she said. There's bad things in those woods. Like I said earlier, I'm a skeptic, and I try to debunk everything. There's only a few things I've experienced that have truly no rational explanation whatsoever. Well, this is one of them. And honestly, I hate even bringing this up because it just sounds so insane. But I know what I saw. So this story kind of highlights to me that paranormal things can happen when you least expect it. You could be going to a Starbucks, and I like the businessman here, representing the paradigm of modernity and not believing in anything outside of the material world. And this guy just kind of has his whole preconceptions shattered in this one moment. So for those of you who don't know, the Skinwalker is from Native American legend. So you have the idea of magic, which is essentially, it presupposes that there are these magical forces, these energetic forces that have an influence on our world. And the idea of the magician is he is a person who, through means of ritual and that sort of thing, finds a way to harness these energies and to redirect them and kind of bend them to his will in order to manifest something or change something on the material plane. So you have white magic and black magic. White magic being using these powers for good to either help or heal people. And then on the other side is black magic. And this is essentially using magic to harm. The other side of it is doing it for personal gain. So, back to the Skinwalker idea. These are Native American black magicians who are seeking power. And basically, according to the legend, there is like an initiation that they have to go through in order to have these powers bestowed to them. And this usually involves some kind of atrocious act of violence, like killing a friend or a family member or something. You usually have to do something horrible to manifest this dark energy. The law of attraction, like attracts like. And in black magic, you're usually consorting with some kind of negative entity, right? They're the ones that are going to give you this power. In order to prove yourself to these things, you have to do something that you can't come back from. And basically, you're getting this power, but they essentially own you. You're cutting ties to anything good or divine. The idea of making a sacrifice is that whatever you're offering, it contains a life force. And you're using this energy to charge your spell or whatever you're trying to achieve. And it's also thought that some of these entities or gods, whatever you want to call them, they feed on this energy. The power that these magicians are seeking is the power to shapeshift, to transform into any kind of animal that they want. I guess it's kind of cool, you could transform into a squirrel and spy on somebody, or you could transform into a wolf and get yourself dinner, take down a deer or something like that. Not have to mess around with bows and arrows. But also, animals are powerful spiritual entities in the Native American belief system, so it does make sense in that context. Through this process, they're losing their humanity, and so the image of the man transforming into the animal is symbolic of this. So is this what this creature was? Was it a skinwalker? I mean, I don't know. Could be, but there's really no way to tell. And I think a lot of these creatures that people see, we like to try to put them into categories. In the study of cryptozoology and paranormal, we have these main categories, the ones that everybody knows about. But like I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with entities that are part of a world that we can't see. We can only catch a glimpse of it here and there whenever it comes into our world. So it would make sense that there's a lot of things in this realm that we never see that exist out there. Things that haven't been documented. So maybe this doesn't fall into any category. We're dealing with things that we only know so much about, which is basically nothing, if I'm being honest. We're really only getting the tip of the iceberg, I think. I mean, we can try to understand it, but at the end of the day, it really is a mystery. And so I think the real benefit in a lot of these stories is simply to affirm that the world is more mysterious and reality is greater than we understand. And I think this is important because it kind of spurs this wonder and curiosity in us. Stay tuned for part 2. And until then, lock your doors and make sure nothing's standing behind you.